Hey, welcome to Franchise Secrets. Today I have Tracy Stapp Herold on with Entrepreneur Magazine. She does all the work on all these lists, franchising lists that Entrepreneur Magazine puts out. And so I asked her straight up, like, do people on the list, are they on the list because they're paying you in advertising? And then I had some follow-ups to her answer because I really wanted to dig into it. One of the other questions I asked her, like, are there magazines out there that are pay for play? We got into some categories because she's always looking at new categories as they make that list. And there's some new categories that came out this year. And we talk about just some of the things that go into the list. And there's one thing around social media that really surprised me. And I don't even know if she's ever shared that publicly before, but I think this will be a fun podcast for everyone. Enjoy.
Representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Von Horn.
All right, Tracy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I got this email that said, hey, Tracy Stapp Herold from Entrepreneur Magazine, Franchise 500, yada, 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 is interested in being on the show. And I thought, I've never had anybody from a magazine like this on the show. And I'm a bit skeptical. of these lists. And I'm sure a lot of people are a bit skeptical. Like, is this just a big money grab for the magazine? Or is this like, how are these lists compiled? And so before the show, I'm like, hey, is it okay if I ask you some of these harder questions that I've always wanted to ask, but never had the opportunity? And you're like, for sure, Erik. So here we are. You guys just released that. By the way, I'm always looking at those rankings and stuff. So I'm so glad you do that. But let's hop into it. Give us a little bit of your background and how long you've been with Entrepreneur and kind of your role there. And then I want to hop right into this list.
Sure. Well, I have been with Entrepreneur for 20 years now, working on these franchise lists all that time. So I've become a little bit of basically the franchise expert at Entrepreneur. And so my role is mainly to put together the Franchise 500 and also to put together the other franchise lists that we create throughout the year based on that data that we collect during the Franchise 500 season.
Awesome. Well, again, I remember looking at those lists like before I was even in franchising, and I was always looking at them. And I got into franchising about 20 years ago, and again, always looking at those lists. So I've been skeptical. Have you ever had anybody skeptical of those lists?
Oh.
Like, number one, it's just because they paid you the most, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've for sure had our skeptics and people claiming, obviously this is whoever advertises. And of course, we are a magazine. We make our money through advertising, but we take the integrity of our lists very seriously. So, I don't believe Taco Bell even advertises in the magazine, which spoiler alert, Taco Bell is number one this year.
But not
because
next
they don't
year.
Need to.
Not next year. They'll be. No, I'm teasing. But that's what I was going to ask you. Like, do you have brands on that list that did not advertise with you in the last year?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think, especially if you look at the top of the list, those are brands that don't really need to advertise their franchise opportunities. Some of them do, and that's great. And we would love it if all of them did. But we definitely are not basing the rankings on who is giving us the most money and that sort of thing. We put a lot of work into the data that goes into the rankings.
Well, let's talk about how you compile the data and kind of from the ground up. How do you build those lists? And I also want to talk about some of the more emerging stuff and like at what point is a brand able to start making the list from a brand new franchisor to possibly getting on that list. So how do you start with that list every year?
Sure. Well, Usually we start around June. We start reaching out to franchisors and letting them know the application process is open for the Franchise 500. And we have a very extensive online form that they need to fill out. And in addition to that form, they have to give us some supporting documentation, which includes their current FDD, their current franchise disclosure document, a list of the units that are open as of July 31st, which is the date that we look at for every year so that we're comparing apples to apples, and some other supporting documentation so that we can try to verify that the information that they're filling out on that form is accurate. Because if we took their word for it, we'd have a lot of inaccurate information.
Oh, it'd be a very different list, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Give me a story. What are some of the things that you've like discovered over the years, and you're like, I was told this and I verified something different. You don't have to name the brand, obviously, but can you give me a story?
It's a good question. I've been doing this so many years and they all kind of blur together, but we definitely have, from year to year, companies that will report numbers that are obviously inflated, and whether they're doing that on purpose or whether they're misunderstanding. Because for us, we always insist that the units have to be open and operating as of that July 31st date. So a lot of times we'll get, well, we've sold this many units, or, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of back and forth with the franchisors to make sure that we get the information as correct as possible. So I would say like at least probably 70% of applications we end up having some sort of question on where we have to go back to the franchisors on it.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are two really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisor and you're frustrated that you're not awarding as many franchises as you thought you would, this is the reason I created the Franchisor Mastermind. If you want access to the information, the techniques that the best franchise sales organizations are using to award franchises, and you want what mature brands have with their playbook of having happy, successful franchisees that grow the right way, then you might want to check out the Franchisor Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections. They want the playbook to achieve both short-term and long-term success. They want to increase enterprise value in their brand. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com.
That's good to know. So at what point can a brand apply? Like they have one location, or is it like they went from 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 in a year? At what point should they, when they get that email from you, should they be like, this might be my year to actually apply?
Yeah. We encourage all franchisors of all sizes to apply for the Franchise 500. We got 1,389 applications this year. So less than 36%, I believe, are going to make it into the top 500. But that doesn't mean that there's not value in being involved in the list, even if you're not going to rank. So we do require, in order to rank, they have to have at least 10 total units, and at least one of those has to be a franchise in the US or Canada. But even if they don't meet that requirement, even if they have 0 units, if they are franchising, we encourage them, because they're going to be listed in the Franchise 500 issue alongside the ranked franchises. They're going to get a free listing on entrepreneur.com. And if they're eligible for other listings that we do throughout the year, we use that data that is submitted through the Franchise 500 to determine that. So for instance, we have our top new and emerging franchises list that's going to be coming up in a couple of months. And so if you're a smaller, newer franchise that thinks, I don't have any chance to rank in the Franchise 500 against Taco Bell and all these big guys, that's fine, but you have the chance to rank in your own little list that's specifically for newer franchisors.
And when did that have to be submitted? Can they still submit for that?
No, the Franchise 500 application is your application for every ranking and list that we do for the next year. So,
all right, let's put on our hat of because I would imagine a lot of buyers out there, or lookers, or people that are just interested in, leaving their job or getting out of corporate America somehow, and are interested in buying a franchise, look at this list. I know that I did. So what's the value to somebody like that? And where's not the value? Where might they be thinking they're getting value, where they may not be getting value? Because sometimes people think this is a list. That means it is a proven concept that is going to make money no matter what, because it's number one in its category or number one somewhere on a list. So talk about like the best way that the normal consumer reader of the magazine can utilize that list.
right. So we are analyzing franchises and ranking them based on more than 150 data points. We consider our list a great starting point for your research, like especially because we've got almost 1,400 brands listed in that magazine. So if you're interested in starting a franchise, that's a great place to look just to see what is out there. But we always emphasize, like, you have to do your own research. The Franchise 500 ranking is based on our metrics that we use, which are, all objective data that we try to, we have shaped this ranking formula over the years that we believe shows, what franchises are having the most success currently and what franchises offer good opportunities currently. But that's not taking into account any subjective data. We don't know what the franchisees are experiencing at the ground level.
That's really important. Let's go there a little bit, because I like what you said, because I see people in my Facebook group, someone just posted the other day, like, I want to start at the top of the funnel. I want to see all of these franchises that are available to me, but you're probably just going to end up buying one. And they want that top of funnel to start, and that Franchise 500 list is probably a great place to start. But I think it's important. Correct me if I'm wrong. It does not measure franchisee satisfaction or like a net promoter score for a franchisee. If I was to, would I recommend my friend buying a franchise here? Doesn't take into account how well they're doing financially, how well they like the brand, how well they like the founder, or any of that. Is that true?
Yeah, that's essentially true. And, obviously we would love to be able to include that type of data, but we haven't gotten to a point where we, feel like we have the ability to do that in a meaningful way. We do look at some factors that can give us an idea of, how happy the franchisees are. We do look at whether there is litigation in the FDD between franchisees and franchisors to see if there's a lot of litigation, maybe the system is a little bit troubled. But we don't look, and one of the big things that people assume that we look at that we don't is franchisee profitability, like you said, because unfortunately that's not something that we have any way to verify on our end, and we wouldn't be able to take the franchisor's word for it.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of objective data analysis and collecting of the data that's hard and consistent throughout. Some of the franchisee satisfaction, profitability, those types of things. I mean, you just can't do that by collecting it the way that you collect it at that mass scale. And that's where buyers need to kind of take a look at that list and then take it for what it's worth as a starting point, like you said, and then dive down and start probably that process with the franchisor where you are the one that is doing the due diligence. This is not a due diligence list. This is a list that, that you've done some objective due diligence on it, but like franchises sold, open, the litigation, things like that. But does not mean this is the right brand for the buyer out there. What else do people misunderstand about the list?
Well, I guess along those same lines, I would just say, again, we're looking at objective data and measuring everyone apples to apples as much as we can. But what your specific need is, or, your lifestyle or what you're looking to achieve or what you're passionate about is not necessarily going to line up with what we're measuring. So, and I think that's important. Like you said, talk to franchisees, really dig in and do your own research. The other thing I would say is don't discount a franchise just because it's not ranked in the Franchise 500. There are lots of great brands that do not make it into that top, 35 or 36% of the list. And that doesn't mean that they're not good brands. So, figure out what you're looking for in a franchise and go from there.
Do you ask or have some type of data around the founders, like their experience in the industry that they've been a part of, or the level of franchise and experience or background of the leadership team? I'm guessing not, but that's another kind of question that I have is that, does that make up any part of the list?
That's a great question. That's not something that we look at for the list in general, no. But it's something for us to consider for the future.
Do you, and I didn't think it was, but again, I just like the audience to really understand so they can get the most value out of the list and put more weight into it so they understand what that list really is and what it's not. What's your favorite thing that you collect in that list? What's the most meaningful piece of data that you collect and that goes into some type of weighting program or like to ultimately come up with a list?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that I have a favorite piece of data that we collect, but we have tried to, look at what we collect over the years and add to it. So, within the last several years, we've started looking at social media followers. So we ask the brands to give us their social media channels, and then we will collect, basically how many followers do they have on those channels, and we use that to help measure their brand strength. Now, it's not the only thing that we use to measure their brand strength, but we also look at, how many years they've been in business and how many years they've been franchising and the system size and other factors like that. So I think that's an interesting one that we have added to our rubric over the last several years. But other than that, we look at costs and fees, we look at size and growth, we look at support, we look at brand strength. And then we have, like I said, our kind of subsidiary rankings that we do throughout the year that is based on this data. So we have some extra data that we collect that doesn't factor into the Franchise 500 ranking, but it does factor into other rankings that we do. So for many years, we've been doing our top franchises for veterans ranking. And so we collect data on how many franchise units are owned by veterans and whether they offer an incentive for veterans and whether anyone on their leadership team is a veteran. So that's kind of getting into that leadership thing that you were talking about. Yeah. And then the last couple of years, we've added a, what do we call it? Top franchises for diversity, equity, and inclusion ranking. So kind of along the same lines as the top veterans ranking, we ask questions about, how many of your franchisees fit into, special categories. And also, is anyone on your leadership in those categories and that sort of thing, so that we can try to, and that list is, I believe, our only list. Well, it's not our only list. It's one of our only lists that we determine editorially. It's not based on a ranking formula like the other lists. We just felt like we can't quantify this stuff.
Sure. Well, one last question around the 500 list. By the way, I love what you said about social media and that being included in the ranking of the brand strength. And I guess you can't really include anything like with Google My Business or Google Reviews, or not Google My Business, but Google Reviews or anything like that. Does that factor into it, or that's all at the franchisee level mostly, but does that have any weight in it?
We tried something and I can't remember exactly what it was called that was along those same lines, and it didn't really work out.
Yeah.
So no, we haven't used anything like that in the ranking.
All right. So last question. What is like some of the, not totally top secret, but what's something that you don't really talk about very often on how you come up with that list, or what's weighted, or give me some secrets. This is called franchise secrets. I need
Franchise
the
secrets,
secret
I know.
stuff. But is there anything that you can tell me?
Well,
No one
one
will
thing that
listen
I
to
would
this.
say,
Just between you and I promise.
right. One thing that I would say is, I've talked about we're trying to compare franchisors, apples to apples. Along those lines, for instance, looking at social media, we're not going to compare, Taco Bell's social media to a, I don't know, a home repair franchise social media presence. Those are obviously going to be different. So we compare, usually I believe social media is compared based on industry. So if you're a fast food franchise, your social media is being compared to the social media scores of the other fast food franchises. If you're a home repair franchise, it's being compared to other home repair franchises. And we have other ways that we parse the data or compare the data so that we're trying to look at, like I said, apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and not comparing a McDonald's to a Cruise Planners and so on. For instance, like, those franchises that are a little cheaper to open, they can grow very fast compared to a McDonald's that costs several $1 million to open. So to compare their growth fairly, one of the things that we consider is what is the cost of this growth, not just how many units did they add, but how much did it cost to add those units, essentially.
Well, thank you for that. This isn't related to that list, but lists in general, and maybe some other magazines that it is pay for play. So are there other lists out there in the magazine world, online or print, where franchisors are paying to be on a list?
I'm sure there probably are, but I cannot comment on which ones they would be. And there are other lists besides ours that I believe are, legitimate and doing their best to present unbiased information. But
I will not press you any further on that. I saw you squirm a little bit, and I told you I was going to ask you lots of questions, but no,
yeah,
that's
fine.
perfect. Let's move on. Let's go on to something. Let's go into some different hot categories, and just list them off. Just what are some of the hot categories out there, and then let's dive into one or two of them. So, what are some of the hot categories?
Yeah, so actually every December we publish our list of what we think are kind of the hot categories in franchising and what's going to be trending in the year ahead. So some of the categories that we identified are beverages, like especially boba tea right now, but also coffee is still hot and juices are still hot. Chicken just, won't stop growing. Health and wellness is a big one. Pets, just every year we have pets on that list because pet spending doesn't stop growing year to year, no matter what's happening. Restoration services is another one, great category that's just, resilient and not going to go anywhere no matter what's happening in the world. And then another one that we identified this year was sports. And we kind of picked that one out specifically because we have a couple of pickleball franchises that have started up in the last year. And we thought that was fun. And obviously, pickleball is a big trend just in the world in general right now, which is interesting to me. But we have lots of sports-based franchises, whether it's, teaching kids sports or recreational stuff for adults and that sort of thing. So we think, people are trying to have fun.
I love pickleball, by the way. So I keep an eye on those. I've had the opportunity to invest in several of them that have come up, but currently I'm not an investor in any of them. by the way, if anybody wants an advisor looking at Front Street to be an advisor to some of those brands, we're interested in pickleball and sports. Everything that you just mentioned are categories that we at Front Street Equity Partners are interested in helping their brands grow enterprise value in that compressed time frame. So that's one that's super, you mentioned health and wellness. We like those categories. Not so much into beverages and chicken. That's something that we're not into that at Front Street Equity. But sports, pets, mental health, IV, wellness stuff, hormones, all of those that are super interesting to us. And let's talk about IV therapy. Is that something like, what have you seen over the years happen in IV therapy? I started looking at that about 5 years ago. But what have you seen?
Yeah, I'd say 5 years ago is probably around when I started seeing these IV therapy franchises pop up, and there are several of them now, and they all seem to be growing well. It's definitely an interesting category. We, in the Franchise 500 ranking list, we will, evaluate what categories we can have from year to year, and there has to be at least one ranked franchise for there to be a category within the list. So this is the first year that we've had an IV therapy category. I believe we had at least 2 franchises that made it into the ranking, and they're looking very competitive for the future.
Do you think IV therapy has longevity to it?
That's a great question. I feel like you're going to get me in trouble here.
I'm trying.
I'm personally squeamish about the idea, but it does seem like not just with IV therapy, but with lots of these alternative type of health and medical services and wellness services, we're seeing a lot of growth there. And it seems like, especially in the last few years, people are trying to take their health and their wellness into their own hands and be proactive about it. So I think if that continues, that the IV therapy will probably, continue to see success.
We are looking at IV therapy brands to work with at Front Street, partner with us. I was genuinely curious about that because we look at a lot of different things when we are looking at working with a brand, because we're true partner with that brand in terms of building enterprise value.
I mean, I'll say we've seen, these hot trending categories that come up from time to time, and they look like they're going to be really successful and they're growing fast, and then they just implode and disappear off the scene. One that I can think of from years and years ago is eBay drop-off stores, which there were quite a few of them, and they were all growing really big. And then all of a sudden, I guess people realized that they could sell their own stuff on eBay. They didn't need to have an eBay pawnbroker do it for them. Another one is meal preparation franchises, not like the ones now that are selling, prepared meals to you that are already prepared, or even, the ones that send stuff to your home. I don't know that we have anything like that yet in franchising, but I can't remember what any of them were called, but, where you would go to a class and you would all assemble meals together, and then you would take those meals home and put them in your freezer, and then, take them out and make dinner for the week or whatever.
They were hot until they weren't. And those are different than the meal prep. We don't have any meal prep today, but so there's some brands out there that are meal prep, and they're different than kind of what we were just talking about.
Right. Yeah. And and meal prep is actually one of the categories that we identified on our hot list this year too. There's only a few of them, but they, we're seeing that as a trend that we think can grow from here.
So I think go back to IV a little bit, and it's kind of a broader conversation though, but we're using IV as just, a starting point. I think the winners in that category will be brands that have amazing founders that are in tune to their customers, what their customers are saying, and in tune to the industry as a whole and health trends in general, so they can adapt as trends might change, and maybe add some other services to it if that makes sense. So I think those would be some of the brands in that category that will probably be a winner. You probably need to get some traction fairly fast in that category too. You don't want to just grow at 2 or 3 or 5 franchisees a year. You probably need to get some mass, and so you can have some brand recognition out there, would be my guess. What do you think?
I think that's true, but I think that it's important for them to make sure that it is sustainable growth as well. Not just selling units to have lots of units and not paying attention to who we're selling them to. I
That's
think,
a good
like you
point.
said, the founders are important, but so are the franchisees, and making sure that you get the right people in place there. We're actually working on our Hall of Fame list right now, which is basically a list of the franchises that have ranked in the Franchise 500 for 25 years or more.
Fun.
And we also have a subsidiary list to that. That's the 10 plus club, which is 10 years to 24 years. So one of the franchisors that is on that list, we asked them for some quotes on what they think is the key to success in franchising. And one of the franchises on that list is Primrose Schools. And Joe Kirchner from Primrose mentioned, we were one of the first franchises in the child, education preschool space, but we didn't, the key to our success was that we didn't focus on just growing for the sake of growth. And we took our time to make sure that we, developed our systems and talked to our franchisees in the beginning and made sure that things were set up so that we could grow in the future and not just have explosive growth at the beginning and then have it all fall apart. That's a big paraphrase of what she said.
I love that because it's true. Brands, you need to be able to sell franchises to become a franchisor and to have enough revenue coming in to support your franchisees and continue to grow. But there's a point when you may sell too many and you don't have enough support, or you haven't learned enough lessons yet, and then you roll out something to way too many new franchisees too soon, and you wish you would have had learned some of those lessons with a handful of franchisees versus 100 of them. So
right.
in the list, do you ever get concerned with brands that are growing too fast?
I do. And that's, again, growth is only one of the factors that our ranking looks at. So we try to get a holistic view of what the health of the franchise system looks like. But we do see franchisors that have explosive growth, and maybe they're near the top of the list one year, and then we start hearing about problems within the system, or within a few years they disappear. I mean, some of the biggest ones that I can think of from over the years are, for instance, Quiznos. Quiznos was in our top 10, several times. They were growing like crazy, but they had a lot of problems, and you don't see Quiznos around anymore. Another one is Curves. Curves was really hot for a while, and Curves was doing really well and growing like crazy. But again, when was the last time that you saw a Curves?
Are you going to have a franchise naughty list? Like you got the Santa's nice list and then you got the naughty list?
I would love to, but I have one in my head.
You got one in your head. You're probably not going to share it with me, are you?
No, sorry.
No, we'll keep
I'm
I'm
fine with spilling the beans about ones from years ago, like Quiznos and Curves.
Sure. For sure. Have you bought a franchise before?
I have not. I won't say that it's never crossed my mind. Obviously, working with the industry for 20 years, and I've definitely thought about it. If I was going to buy a franchise, I feel like the time that I was most kind of thinking about it was after my daughter was born, and I was thinking I want to be able to stay home with her and, have more freedom and more flexibility, which I think is what motivates a lot of people for franchise ownership. And so I was looking at franchises that could kind of be run part-time or run from home and that sort of thing. Nothing ever came of it. I'm just not that ambitious, but, and I think, it's good to recognize in yourself whether you are really cut out for running a franchise, because even if it's a part-time franchise or a home-based franchise, if you want to make it successful, it's going to take some effort and some, entrepreneurialism.
What do you wish most people understood about kind of Entrepreneur Magazine, the franchise division of it, or the list that they don't really know? Like, what do you wish that they could understand that they may not be aware of?
Well, I mean, we've already covered the fact that it's not pay for play. That's a big one. And, sometimes it's sour grapes when people accuse us of that, I think. They don't like where they ranked or that they didn't rank. But, a lot of times it's, normal readers like yourself assuming that, there must be some pay to play element in this. I would just, love for them to understand how much work goes into this. Again, we start it in June and we go through kind of the beginning of December to get this issue together. And we are going through every application with a fine-tooth comb and trying to make sure that the information that we present is as accurate as possible. I would say also that we want people, we're proud of the Franchise 500, and especially this is our 45th annual Franchise 500. So we think it's great and we're very proud of it. But I would love for people to be more aware of the other franchise rankings that we do and that the Franchise 500 isn't it. So for franchisors, we want them to understand, even if you don't rank in the Franchise 500, you have lots of opportunities for other rankings and other lists throughout the year. And please apply for the Franchise 500 so you won't be left out of those. And then, for readers, again, like a Franchise 500 company might not be the one for you, but maybe you're into emerging concepts. We got our top new and emerging list. Maybe you're a veteran. We have our top franchises for veterans. So we have lists in every issue of the magazine, and we work hard on them.
If the franchisor is listening right now, they're like, I never had an email from Entrepreneur, or I missed it. How do they get on your email list to make sure that they don't miss something like that, to get on any of these lists?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do our best to reach out to everybody that's in our database. And if they're not in our database, we have a running wish list that we put together and we try to get email addresses for them. So we do our best to reach out to companies, but if we have not reached out to you or we've not reached out to the correct person or you're just not on our list yet, definitely reach out to us. We have a form on our site that you can fill out. It's a very short form. It's not like the Franchise 500 application, but it's just basically a request form. And I think if you search on entrepreneur.com for add a franchise listing or something along those lines, that form should come up.
And we'll try to get that link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, if you look at any franchise listing page on our site, like if you go to Taco Bell's listing page and scroll down to the bottom, you'll find it at the bottom of the page there too. It says add a listing, and then there's another link that says update your listing. So you would click on the add a listing one, fill in your information, let us know you exist, let us get you on our mailing list. We'll also reach out to you with information on how to get listed on the website. Otherwise, you can reach out to us anytime at franchise500@entrepreneur.com, even if it's not Franchise 500 season. But that add a listing form is definitely our preferred way to learn about new brands and get them added to our mailing list.
What categories do you think are going to be coming up for the new or the hot or the exciting categories that aren't really a category today? What are some of those that you see happening in the future or that might happen?
I mean, we're seeing a lot of dessert franchises, and I'm trying to remember what types of desserts specifically. But I think people are really going after the sweet tooth.
Well, it's easy. I love sweets. I've got a huge sweet tooth.
Yeah, right.
And pickleball will be its own category before long, or at least it should.
I think it will be. Yeah, for sure. We're seeing a lot of waffles, churros, so that dessert and people, I guess, treating themselves.
Do you think more food trucky type stuff? Do you think that would be its own category or something mobile? Is there anything like a mobile category?
We actually have a list. One of our separate lists that we do is our top home-based and mobile franchises. And then we just kind of combine those into one rather than trying to do top home-based and top mobile. Because a lot of them you're running it from your home and then you go in your truck or whatever. It's not like you're just sitting in your home all day. So we have, yeah, we have a lot of mobile franchises, both in food. There are quite a few in food. And whether they can be home-based or mobile is one of the items that we show in the magazine in the Franchise 500 issue. So if you see a yes in that home-based mobile column, you know that there's either a home-based option or a mobile option. Usually with the food franchises, it's going to be a mobile option. You're not going to be selling Auntie Anne's pretzels out of your garage. But
No. I got another one. Last question, I think. Maybe the last question. Do you have a list of area development or area rep? So a brand that has kind of that master franchise model with area representatives, used to be called area development. Do you have a list of those?
we do ask franchisors if they require that franchisees buy multiple units or area development agreements. So we do have that information within our data. And I believe it was last year, or it might have been the year before, we did our top franchises for multi-unit owners list.
I like that list. I'm meaning like, you know, the sub-franchisor, you buy the whole region, because nobody has a list out there like that.
We don't keep track of those guys. It's an interesting concept. I think it might get a little confusing on our end, distinguishing between the Taco Bell area developer and Taco Bell corporate.
It can kind of get confusing that way.
It's definitely interesting.
How was it? Did I beat you up too bad on some of these questions?
Not too bad.
Did I make you squirm a little bit?
Just a little bit,
And you proved me wrong. Like, was I completely wrong by saying this is pay for play? Was I wrong?
Well, I hope you believe that you were wrong, because if it was pay for play, my job would be a lot easier.
That's good.
From June to the end of the year, I am a very busy person, and if it was pay for play, it would be a much easier job.
Tracy, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.